All right, I want to make a video on what makes a good musician. This isn't a video about what makes a successful musician. There's a lot of factors involved in that are beyond your control. Really, when it boils down to it, I've met a lot of great musicians um, that one could consider successful, but not of their own accord. This is a video about how to make good music, and surprisingly, when it comes to making music, good music, a lot of what goes into making good music is not got anything to do with playing music. Um, now, I can't say I make good music, but I can make music. Um, you have to be naturally gifted at it, but I think everybody is, to an extent. A lot of what you see in music and what you hear in music, if you research the musicians and you get what they're saying behind their music, especially in their lyrics and where they're going, you begin to see a common thread of spirituality among all these musicians. Spirituality must exist in order for you to make good music. Um, you can have a soul, but we all have soul, and we all are maybe one soul together. That's kind of what I believe. But in order to make good music, spirituality is not what a lot of people think. It's not a calmness and somebody that's always, hey man, and calm in a certain situation. That's a personality. Um, Spirituality is just raw self. It's you being you, exactly who you are, with a degree of a filter through it. You're expressing your soul, but how that comes across is filtered by spirit or dampered or what augmented, however you want to say it. It's flavored with spirit. And that's not something that we can manufacture on our own. That seems to be an outside source. Kind of like music. I can have music inside me, but I can't express it without some vehicle, without some way of doing that. Um, that's kind of what spirit is when one goes to express themselves in music. And a lot of times you'll find that these artists have things in common when it comes to deeper spirituality, not just being well versed in reading things and you know head knowledge. Anybody can get head knowledge, but different practices they've done. You can go sit in nature and watch meditation, things like this. This is what allows you to branch out because music is connected, and how one can see themselves connected with other people depends upon their spirituality and how much a degree of spirituality that they've attained by sitting there and observing this and thinking outside themselves. That's always the balance when it takes becoming a musician. You have to have some type of ego because you're doing it for fame and recognition. I don't care who you say you are, at some point or another, you want some type of gratification inside that your music touched somebody. Even if it's 100% genuine, still that's ego. No matter how you look at it, it's not necessarily unhealthy ego, but it's still a filter that you're looking through your mind. And that's not really spirituality. You allow spirituality to affect that by seeing yourself maybe as outside of yourself, being less self absorbed, less self centered. How do I relate with other people, and how am I any different than other people? I'm really not. You learn that through the hard knocks of life. When things happen to you, that could happen to so and so, but I didn't think it would happen to me, and then it does. And you start to see that I'm not so special, I'm not so different, that we're all one. So as one begins to understand this, they begin to see themselves related. They may see synchronicities amongst themselves and in society. You think of somebody and then they call you that you haven't heard from. You see a set of numbers or something, and then you see them again that same day, and realize, I haven't seen those numbers before, and then you might see it somewhere else, and then it might mean something. You start paying attention to this correlation, how everything is related. This is philosophical in a sense, but the philosophy part is in your mind, and your mind begins to grasp that Just because someone is philosophical doesn't mean they're spiritual. But it's kind of hard to get spiritual and not become philosophical. There's a difference. There's a lot of people that, because they might sell philosophy, they're selling something to you. They come up with a way of life that if you subscribe to them or do whatever they ask you to do, they'll give you more of that philosophy. That also borderlines on religion, and religion is not spirituality. But you take time to see how things relate in life. Now, how that boils down to your music is you take a theme within music and you build off that theme. It could be just two chords, and you begin to see how those two chords relate to something else. Change a key, and you begin to see that all of a sudden something else is taking over. It's like it was pre-made. The thing about music is there's so many certain combinations. Now, some people say it's infinite. Whether or not it's infinite, the chances of you coming up with those infinite combinations within your lifespan is pretty slim. You're not going to do that. Whatever your personality is geared towards is the music that you're going to be geared towards, and that's the music that you're going to start resonating in your songs. But what you want to do with spirituality and what you want to do with making good music is realize, how does it affect other people? Being a musician and being able to make good music is a big responsibility. You touch other people's lives. You begin to impact the way other people feel. You relate to other people, and you add into this universal pool of music, and you're expressing yourself. And how you do that has to a direct reflection of your spirituality. You can be a machine or a computer that's creating songs, but there's nuances in there that you cannot replicate that are human, because the human soul with spirit creates music. When somebody plays something and they say, man, that dude's got a lot of soul, or that person's been somewhere, it can be something really simple, and it doesn't have to be complex, but you can see that that individual has been somewhere. His soul is reflecting, even if it's not perfect. The perfection of music, trying to build this perfect music, is not really spiritual. That is mental, and goes back to that ego aspect, that my music was absolutely perfect. And you can see this a lot in music. Like if I take the example of Mozart versus Beethoven, Mozart was probably one of the greatest musicians of all time, one of the greatest composers of all time. But when I listen to his music, it's almost too perfect at times, as compared to somebody like Beethoven. I listen to Beethoven's music, and I hear some flaws sometimes. I hear something that he's not quite finished yet. I hear he's still exploring. He's still learning. There's a difference there. There's a type of, I can relate with that. I can relate with not knowing. I can relate with not being perfected. I can relate with not being sure, but I'm going to do it anyway. There's something about that within music. And Beethoven did spend a lot of time in solitude and depression, whereas in Mozart just had it. He did some other things that were spiritual that you can hear later on his music. If you know a little bit about Mozart, he did get into a lot of spirituality later on in life, but he was resentful about it in the beginning. He was forced into a lot of things. He was forced to play for the Catholic Church. He was forced to perform for deacons. He was forced to perform for the Pope by his father. So there was a lot of rebelliousness, but later on in life, as he's contemplating his own death, and he begins to open up to spirituality, he wrote about this extensively. You hear a different tone in his music. It's not so much how many notes can I fit in this one bar. It is more, how can I give you a lasting impression of what I'm going through. As he began to delve into his spirituality, it began to come out in his music. And it definitely had nothing to do with him sitting there and writing music. That's all he did. So this is way, if you want to make good music, you pick something. You pick something that resonates with you. The simpler, the better. And you build off that, and you see how it relates. And you don't worry about, spirituality doesn't worry about mistakes. Some of the most spiritual people I've ever met in my life will cuss you out in 2 seconds. They'll punch you in the face in 2 seconds. They are angry people. They're driven. And people say, well, that's not spiritual. That's not your perception of what spirituality. That's not what your mind is telling you that spirituality is. They're being humble. They're showing them true selves. They're they're not painting themselves over with a picture. They're not being pretentious. They are who they are, and they're saying this is the way I am. This that allows that individual to open up to change. That allows the individual to open up to spirit, to say to say guide my music, to guide my direction, guide my thinking, change me because I'm flawed and I need help. And anytime somebody comes up and says, I know how to play something perfectly, um, you know, I would, I've ran across those people. I've been one of those people. I'm going to play this song perfectly. And I grew up like that. I wanted to sound exactly like this guy. I wanted to play this exactly the way it sounded on the album. And there was a hollowness inside, an emptiness inside that left me, yeah, that can get you something like fame. I was never really into the fame. I was never really into the pat on the back. But I was into, I want to touch your heart. I want to express myself in this. And I guess from a sense that is the right way of approaching an ego, that I want to affect somebody's life. It could be for the worst. I've had ex-wives that have pissed me off, and yeah, I'll pick up my guitar and I'll turn on some distortion and play it loud, but I'm still affecting them. Is that spiritual? Yeah, that's spiritual. You're expressing yourself, and that's what spirituality is humility. It is who I am right now, and that's it. It's not painted over. It's not glossed over. So when it comes to making good music, you just let it go. You don't worry so much about whether or not who's going to think of this. What are they going to think when they hear this? You lose it when you think that way. And over time, meditation, I didn't know until about 4 or 5 years ago when I started getting into meditation exactly how much meditation is in music. Now, I can make a whole video on that, and I've thought about it several times, but you're going to get into some copyrights, and you're going to have to get into certain things about certain artists that may be protected. I don't know, or I have to go get their permission or the estate's permission. But you begin to look at a semblance of colors. Dark Side of the Moon, that was the obvious one. The colors of the chakras. You read the Vedic text. If you listen to Hendrix, you know that Hendrix is into some Far East stuff. If you listen to Ravi Shankar, you know that Ravi Shankar is into Hinduism. He's embracing concepts of Buddhism. He's looking into Taoism. You can hear that, and you know that by listening to John Lennon's interviews when they went over there to talk to him, and Ravi Shankar was asking them why they were using drugs, that they didn't need to use drugs when they talked to George Harrison. And then there's an interesting story about George Harrison and Gary Moore. Gary Moore's, Dreamweaver. That whole album, Dreamweaver, it is dedicated to a guru that he got a book from. I believe it was a friend of George Harrison's. That he and not Gary Moore, but Gary Wright. I'm sorry, Gary Wright. He ended up. My Love Is Alive, and if you listen to it, my soul's like a wheel that's turning. That's a chakra, which is a wheel, a spinning wheel. So you begin to see that these cats had some type of spirituality that wasn't being taught to the normal layman at the time. You had to seek it and you had to look for it. That was, of course, back in the 70s and late 60s. You really would have had to have gone out and sought it. It's available today, but surprisingly, it's not really gotten into by a lot of musicians. And our music is kind of machine-like. And you could come up with programs that would say, well, what's the perfect mathematical formula for a melody? And you could play that. But it would be so perfect, and you hear it in music. It's in the background. It's pretty much what music is nowadays. But it's not got any human elements. There's no soul to it. There's no mistakes. It's perfect every time. The vibrato doesn't change. There's no syncopation that doesn't make any sense. There's so many things in music that bring out soul that were actually mistakes. And that's where you open yourself up to spirituality and being successful and making good music. You're willing to make mistakes because you want to see where the music will go. And you don't make a mistake in the long run because it took you somewhere else that you didn't mean to go. You know that something else is guiding it because you've learned to do this in your life. You've learned to let go and allow life to teach you, to show you, to see what I can do. When I go out to the forest, I don't know what's going to happen. I go to a hike and I go out and I look at nature, and I hang out, not to in some hippie sense. You can use that. The hippies were showing you that. And you can use that. But again, that's to identify with a certain brand or a genre of human being. That's ego. But just to go out to be taught in the nature, to watch stars, to watch the sun go across the sky. You don't have control of that. You can predict it, but you can't predict when a cloud's going to rise up and blot out the sun. You can't predict those things. You can kind of get an idea and an imagination, but you allow yourself to be shown and opened up. You go out. People are saying, "Well, I've been that way where I can't go out," and I've heard that from people. I can't go out. People they terrify me. Because you're separated. You think you're still under this illusion that you're separate. And that can lead to some mental illnesses. That can lead to a lot of depression. And ultimately leads to narcissism, which cuts you off from everything. And you'll never be happy even with yourself eventually. And you'll go crazy. So, you got to get out and you got to branch out and find out what's new. What is going to happen here? It's beyond my control, and you surrender yourself to see what's going on. And you do this on a daily basis. And you might even put down your music. Some of the best music I've ever made is music that I haven't played for 6 months. There's times in my life where I put down my guitar and not played because I was bored. And I know when I hit a rut not to play guitar. I know don't touch music because I'm being too focused on music, and somewhere my ego is running. I'm trying to become better than what I actually am, or I'm thinking that I'm better than I actually am. But I have to allow life to teach me other things, to go do other things, exercise, take a walk, go talk to somebody, relate to somebody, find out that I'm not that different. Isolation will lead to, there's another thing getting back to Mozart. And oddly, Beethoven was into isolation, and that's one complaint that people have about his music. It didn't grow, it was stagnant until he went deaf. And Beethoven, if you know Beethoven, he got very frustrated. He was getting into a pattern of OCD with his music because he was losing his hearing. And one day, finally, his hearing, it went so bad that he got so frustrated that he threw his ear horn and just let it go and just forgot about it and didn't care anymore and just began to write. And when he did, the Ninth Symphony was finished. He began to finish the Ninth Symphony, and it came out to be one of the greatest accomplishments in the history of human achievements because he gave up. He just finally said, I'm to the point where I'm fed up with trying to perfect what I'm doing here, because he was a perfectionist and he isolated himself. But that allowed Beethoven to have to rely upon other things, and he did. He had to have other musicians to play at that point because he had to feel the music. He would put his chest up to the violin or the bass, and he would listen. He would touch the instruments. So he had to interact, and he became a part of those instruments. And that allowed him to open up and write better music. And he wasn't writing music at the time because he couldn't hear it. So that, again, shows that point that making good music doesn't necessarily mean playing music, because he couldn't play, because he couldn't hear it. So he had to teach himself how to feel it. And once he did that, he took off. And he no longer was in that box anymore that it seems to have he had been in from the Pastoral Symphony on up to the Ninth Symphony. He was kind of stuck there. So as you approach music, and if anybody tells you, practice is the way to music, what are they practicing? Are they practicing music, or are they practicing spirituality? Are they seeing the correlation between a bear and a dog? Our sun and the stars? Are they looking around? Are they seeing things that relate to things that are around them? Are they allowing life like a stream? Are they jumping in the river of life and going wherever it goes and surrendering and see where it will take them? Because that's what we need in music. That's what musicians need. Not something that says, well, this is the way you have to do it and it must be done this certain way. Because I can guarantee you it's already been done that way. And you're not doing anything in the world of music. You might be getting some fame right now, but eventually the genre will change and eventually the generation will come along and they'll look back at your music and they'll say, well, it sounds good, but there's really nothing new there. It's kind of the same old, same old. So, when you go out, separate yourself from the music. Allow what you learn to come in with your music and just go ahead and start playing. Just play whatever comes to mind. Don't try to think about it and see where it takes you. And you'll begin to see that the simplest of music will begin to develop and people will notice it and you'll notice it and you'll begin to affect other people in ways that you don't know. Because behind music, music makes people think on a subconscious level and it makes them feel. And they don't know that yet. They won't realize that. Not yet. But once your music makes a lasting impression on them, they'll go back and they may hear it again at a later date and it snaps them back to a different time, a different vibration. And that's what you're doing with music, is you're raising people's vibration. You're controlling their vibration because the soul is vibrating. Everything around you is vibrating at a frequency. That's why it's held together. It's because of this sound of frequency and resonance. Like when somebody chime something, if you hit an A in a room full of guitars on your guitar or on any kind of stringed instrument, all the other strings in the room will resonate with that because of the sound. You're affecting the sound. Human beings are no different, and you do that with your music. So, but you can only do it to the degree upon which you know. If you want to, people with some of the greatest romantic music of all time are probably the biggest heartbroken people of all time. People like Rachmaninoff, people like Beethoven. This is romantic type music that makes you sad, it makes you heavy, because it's the resonance of what they are. It's like they've led a broken life. Whereas in where you hear Mozart and you hear all this great music going on that's just, all over the place and so many scales. He lived a very fascinating, excuse me, I have a cold, but he lived a very quick life when he was young. He wanted to go everywhere, almost manic type. And then as he got older, he contemplated death. Death came into his life with his father. He began to contemplate his own death. You start to hear this music that's more somber, that's more meaningful, that begins to resonate at a deeper level of sadness. Don Giovanni, The Fear of Death. And he worked through that, and he wrote about that when he finally embraced death. These are alchemical principles. Alchemy is another good source. It's all over music. It's very prevalent. There's nothing wrong with alchemy. Is the same as the chakras. There's 7 stages. There's 7 chakras. I know there's more chakras. We can, you can get into all that ego talk about book knowledge of all these different 9 chakras, 12 chakras, 13 chakras. But for the basis of music, there's 7 major notes. There's 7 major notes in a major scale. There's 7 notes. Of course, there's different scales. Yes, we know that. But you won't be able to get those other scales if you don't know the 7 major scales. So you'll never go anywhere with spirituality if you don't understand the concept of 7s. And if you don't see that in music, I don't know what to say. It's all over it. So the musicians know this. And that's what that's where they draw from. And you can tell when a music, like this band has been great for a while. They've toured for a while. They've gotten into some drugs. They've gotten into some money. And now their albums all sound the same or they suck because their spirituality dwindled. Spirituality, it's not you. You don't have spirit. You cannot manufacture spirit. It has to come through an accumulation. It's no different than the grass gets dew in the morning and dew's on the grass. The dew is not the grass. On an esoteric sense it is, but exoterically it is not the grass. The dew accumulates on the grass, and the dew is something from something else. And even though all are one in this kumbaya world, in this kumbaya cosmic, yes, the grass and the dew are the same. Yes, esoterically speaking. Music, unfortunately, we have to exoterically play it to touch other people's lives, to affect other people's souls, because the grass is like your soul and the spirit is like the dew. And while it's there, it will feed that grass, especially in the desert. If you've been to the desert in California, you know that it doesn't rain. The only source of water there is the dew in the morning. So like that, this way spirit comes. And you don't manufacture this. This comes through your how much time you've spent, interacting with others and contemplating your existence with others. And how are you the same and not different? How is everything related? And how is my spirituality being? Am I being phony with my spirituality, trying to sound like I'm a guru, trying to sound all deep all the time, and trying to sound like I got it all together? That's not spirituality. That's an effect. You're looking for a cause and an effect upon people. Spirituality goes beyond cause and effect. Those hermetic principles should show you this. All polarity and duality, male and female, should show, well, you can try to be male, you can try to be female, try to be male, try to be female, back and forth, till you finally realize, isn't there something that's both? Yes, there is. That's the whole concept. Yes, there is a cause and effect. There's one cause and one effect. That's what you're seeking, and you can't find it. This is what the Taoists are talking about. It's not findable. It's not nameable. It's you. It is around you. It's how much of it you want and how much of it you're looking for. What you're seeking in life and what your goals and motivations are for making music, to make a lasting impression on somebody, or are you doing it to touch something or to add to something or to leave somebody with a mark of a melody that moves them and makes them different, that changes their perspective the same way yours was changed when you spent that time out in the woods, when you went to the sweat lodge, when you fasted, and when you went out, when you visited the hospital and talked to some old dude that you don't even know, that's dying just because you had nothing else to do that day, or the guy you gave $1 to down there to try to get something to eat, or maybe to get himself a drink because he's going through DTs, without any judgment upon another human being, giving without expecting to receive. That's what music is. And when you expect to receive something back, like a contract and a bunch of money and a bunch of fame, you might get that. You got to have contacts. Doesn't necessarily have to do with spirituality, but you're going to get that if you continue to seek that, but maintaining it, you won't do it without spirit. And that's what you'll see about some of the greatest guitar players of all time, some of the greatest musicians of all time. They've spoken about that. They're burned out. They're stuck in a genre. They can't get out of that genre. They want to move on and branch out, but they're stuck by contract. They're stuck by fans' expectations. This is the whole Beatles in a nutshell, and why they broke up, because they wanted to branch out to different music, and not everybody did. And some of the fans didn't want them to. So think about that when it comes to making music. And, I'm no expert in it, and I can't say that I make good music. But I know music. I do have a natural gift with music to be able to express myself, but it's not just in music. It branches out into other areas of my life. I don't see the stream as being any different than the lake. I don't see the lake as being any different than the ocean. One's got salt, the other one doesn't, but the salt that's in the lake is frozen in the rocks. If you were to dissolve it, it would still all come out to be the same. It's just gone through a change in that spirit. It's gone through some type of spiritual change. And as human beings, that's what we're here to do with each other. But I hope this video helped in any way. I don't feel too good, so I haven't been able to stream any music or any games, but I just thought I would talk a little bit about music. But thanks for listening, and I hope you have a good day.